was a letter from her saying that she was disconnecting from me. You probably are familiar with this, you've seen it in the paper, but that I was destroying her and that she didn't want to see me again. That's it, Carr, and it was signed.
The newspapers were accusing him of being a fraud and lobbied the government to launch an inquiry.
When the fire goes off, you know by the number that went off?
Hubbard decided there was only one answer. He would take to the high seas. With his loyal band of disciples, he would move himself and his empire outside any government's jurisdiction.
At one point, he turned around and said to us in a very sort of masterful way, in a very almost ambassadorial sort of way, he said, it's perfectly all right to step outside the law, because the law itself is aberrated. So in order to achieve our ends, that gives us license to step outside the law.
Hubbard's followers were about to see the consequences of life beyond the law, as the Messiah became their dictator. In 1967, with his own navy of Scientologists, the Sea Organization, Ron Hubbard set sail. Hannah Eltringham, then 24, went with him. She'd never crewed on a large ship before, but Hubbard detected that she was unusually well equipped for naval command.
Hubbard called me into his cabin and stood right in the doorway of his cabin, fiddling with the E-meter, and started asking me questions about when I had last been a captain. Well, this could only be past lives, because I'd never been a captain in this life. So I started, thinking back and came up with this past experience about being a space captain of a spaceship and being blown up in space, and the planet was being invaded, and all this fighting and blasting going on, and so forth. And at the end of it, he peered over the E-meter at me and he said, "Were you one of the loyal officers?" And at that point, I got this uprush, and I felt, good, I must have been one of those loyal officers. I must have been one of the elite.
The young Hannah was appointed captain of Hubbard's No. 2 ship, a 400-ton trawler. His flagship was a 3,000-ton converted cattle ferry. On board, Hubbard had a personal guard called the Commodore's Messengers.
They took care of everything for him. They dressed him, they got him ready for bed, they lit his cigarettes, they held his ashtray.
Most of the messengers were young girls, 13, 14, 15. They were an extension of his communication. So when somebody saw them on the ship or they came up to them, it was like you were talking to him.
On one occasion, Jerry Armstrong, who'd been sent on a shore errand, was visited by one of Hubbard's messengers.
This was Terry, who was later to be my wife, and she came to me where I was working, and she said, "The Commodore wants to know, is it true that you went to the U.S. Embassy and applied for 30-some-odd visas?" And I said, "Yes, sir," because that's how you respond to the messenger. And her next message was, "The Commodore says you're a fucking asshole."
The attacks on Scientology had pitched Hubbard into one of his periodic depressions. His response was to take it out on his followers on sea and land. He designed a new disciplinary code called ethics, which put many of them into what he called lower conditions of existence, like liability, doubt, or treason. To rise out of these conditions, penances were required. Liability, for example, required you to deliver an effective blow to Scientology's enemies.
Everybody was supposedly in these lower conditions, which was quite astonishing because everybody really loved Ron and wanted to contribute to having whatever his dreams might be come true.
What happened was it became a very heavy, almost military organization. People changed. I think people became scared. They were scared of ethics, scared of what would happen, and so they became, I think, very intimidated.
At sea, the cruelty extended to children. On one occasion, Hubbard was infuriated by a small boy who had unwittingly chewed a telex.
He put this 4.5-year-old little boy, Derek Green, into the chain locker for 2 days and 2 nights. It's a closed metal container. It's wet, it's full of water and seaweed, it smells bad. But Derek was sitting up on the chain in this place on his own in the dark for 2 days and 2 nights. He was not allowed to go to the potty. I mean, he had to go in the chain locker on his own, soil himself. He was given food. And I never went near it, the chain locker, while he was in there, but people heard him crying. That is sheer, total brutality. That's child abuse.
People were in awe of him and people were frightened of him. He was the boss. He was the dictator. He could order anyone to do anything on board. He was ruthless. He could be, at times, charming, but he could also be very belligerent, and he could also be very uncaring and cruel.
Yet Hubbard's disciples continued to believe in him. In 1968, he took a select few around the Mediterranean on his yacht, the Enchanter, on a project he called the Mission into Time. The task was to find treasure Hubbard had buried during his previous lives.
We were in a tizzy, you know, all this excitement of this upcoming, very important mission. And I was amongst one of the chosen, and we sailed off with our metal detectors and went to a variety of locations and did find some metal at the basement of what he claimed used to be a temple, in which he had liaisons with some priestess during his trips to Sardinia. There was metal buried down below, and he was very triumphant during those times. It was very heady stuff for us people. It had a very magical, magnetic, hypnotizing effect on the followers.
Hubbard was also engaged on a further great expansion of Scientology. Once a Scientologist reached the state of clear, he became an operating thetan, or OT. Hubbard now designed a series of secret OT levels. Each one was part of an unfolding saga, which revealed that we are all infested by thetans, the souls of exiles from the Galactic Federation, which under Prince Xenu ruled this sector of the galaxy 95 million years ago. If you ever reached the top OT level, you would have crossed the bridge to total freedom. As always in Scientology, each OT level could only be reached after an expensive course. Did Hubbard believe it, or was he having his followers on?
He probably always knew he was running a con. You know, he must have known that much of the stuff he was talking about was sort of rubbish. But I think after a while, when he found there were thousands of people and the adulation around the planet for this man, I think that started to take him over. I think he began to believe that he was, if not God, then very close to God.
Hubbard's new cosmology was accompanied by new forms of punishment on board ship. Crew members who displeased him were liable to be thrown overboard before being retrieved from the harbour below. If they reoffended, they were tied up and blindfolded first.
I saw one woman, Julia Lewis Salmon, from the United States, thrown overboard. This woman must have been in her 50s. She had her hands and I think her feet tied, maybe only her hands tied and a blindfold. But she went over. She was so panicked at the thought of being thrown over this way. She was standing on the edge of the deck, panicked, beside herself, shouting. And I was standing on the A deck with Hubbard and his other aides watching this going on. And Julia didn't jump over. She had to be pushed over because she was incapable. She was in such a fit.